Mama Helen TV show, Mama Helen Otide, Mommy Tiwade, Mama Helen Otide, oríṣiríṣi ara.
And now, your host, Mama Helen Oritsejafor.
Wow, wow, wow. This is still Mama Helen and you, all the way this time around from the United Kingdom. I am really excited coming your way wherever you're watching. I am literally excited. I need you to now do something for me. This is a time for you to call someone out there. Let them know that Mama Helen is actually on, and today it is going to be awesome. Yes, it is. So wherever you're watching, all over the world, in Africa, in Asia, in America, in Europe, this is it. Today's topic is so very, very important, and I'll tell you why. Because mental illness can actually lead to emotional challenge. It could be thoughts, damaging, and then the behavioral pattern is also affected as well. And that's why on Mama Helen and you today, we're actually going to be looking at the effects of mental health on our society. I know that you have something to talk about, but you want to also learn something, and possibly maybe you'll be able to have your way out of this ailment or whatever it is. The stigmatization and what have you shouldn't stop you. You can still arrive at your destination in life. Back in a moment. It is still Mama Helen and you. Don't touch the dial.
When we talk about mental health is not something that is being spoken about every time. It's something that people really feel like when you're going through that thing mentally, you feel you're the only one going through it. And you kind of like feel like nobody really understands where you're coming from.
Being an African American, I have roots in Nigeria and in America, and I can see that in the African community, mental health is often treated as like something supernatural and something spiritual. So people that's how they take it, go to church or just pray it away. And in the Black community, it's often downplayed as something that you can overcome, meaning everybody is saying things like, oh yeah, you just gotta think positive, or you just gotta push past that. And there's no line to be drawn as to what is to be pushed past and where we really need help. And then we start to see things like substance abuse, right? Because people are looking for ways to cope.
When all is not well with the person, all is not well with you, psychologically you are down. When we say down, they're different from being down where you have hope that tomorrow will be better. And when you are hopeless, it can even lead to suicide.
There are so many reasons to mental health. Medical, psychiatric.
The environment is one of the major factors. Depression. Depression, as it is in our country today, is increasing. There's frustration everywhere. There's hunger parading the streets. People cannot feed. Imagine a man that is jobless. Because let's say close to 70% of Nigerians are jobless, especially the men. They are jobless and they have families to feed, they have children to train. What do you think they will do? Their brain will start wandering here and there, and that leads to depression.
If I can't come out and talk about how I feel or what's going on with me without being attacked for having an acclaimed spiritual attack, or without being told to get over it or push past it, then I'm going to start internalizing, I'm going to start drawing back. And I feel like that's another effect.
I believe that apart from the fact that some are spiritual, the majority are self-imposed problem. What I mean is that some people, most of the things they are allowed to enter into their body. For instance, people that smoke Indian hemp, cocaine and all these hard drugs, all these things can affect somebody's brain, and it can cause mental problems.
With the situation of how the country is now, at least I believe it's a major factor that affects majority of persons' mental health. Some major problem is as a result of maybe not being able to make both ends meet. Not be able, maybe as it's gone on the street, no grain of garri at home for his children to eat. Nothing like that. What they will eat that morning is not there. What they will eat the afternoon or will leave is not there. And as the head of the family, what to do is crack his head to take up what to do. Depression is another factor that can lead to mental health.
Situation and circumstances around also can cause somebody to be depressed. For instance, if somebody does not have faith in God, you don't have faith in God with all the challenges that people are having today, if they don't have hope, there is nothing they hold on to, they cause depression.
Sometimes we don't even know what kind of things need special attention versus what's normal. We don't know when certain feelings and thoughts that we're having warrant like extra attention and care. And then the next thing is, where do we start? Who do we talk to? Where do we go to find this help?
And welcome back, viewers. I know you're extremely excited. You also want to know about the import of mental health and how you can actually work your way to the healing process and possibly fulfill destiny and total achievement in life. I am excited. With me to deal with this topic, the effects of mental health on our society, from my first right is no other person today than Mr. Chaz Simpson.
Well, thank you for
I'm
inviting
sure
me.
our viewers would like to know a little about you. Could you please let us know you?
Yeah, sure. So my background is in clinical psychology. I studied psychology with clinical psychology at the University of Lincoln. You've got to be specific about that part.
Okay.
So I did that as an honors degree.
Did you?
Yeah. It was a really interesting time, actually. I learned a lot about how people think, From there, I worked in homelessness prevention for South Holland for about a year, where I learned a lot about Britain's issues with homelessness and everything being done to prevent it, which is quite a lot, actually. From there, I went back to school, studied a master's in film production because that's kind of one of my great passions. And now then from there I went to the YMCA, and now I'm working adjacent to Children's Protective Services.
Such a pleasure.
No, thank you.
Thank you for being here. And of course, next to him is no other person than Miss Karen Thomas.
Hi.
It's such a pleasure having you. You look good.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm sure our audience will also like to know you.
Okay. I studied hypnosis about 10 years ago in college, and so learned a lot about the brain, and then I went on to do a psychology degree. So I actually have a practice. So I practice, I have a clinical practice. I'm a psychotherapist, and I help people with anxiety, depression, trauma, addiction, all sorts of things. Yeah, so using the application of hypnosis and some other techniques as well.
I see. Well, it's really a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
On set today. So, the very first question is mental health. What is it?
Ladies first.
Thank you. Yeah, that is the big question. I think there's quite a misconception about mental health, especially when we talk about anxiety and depression. I think a lot of my clients that come and see me think it's something that they have, like a disease or something wrong with them, and actually is really to do with the brain. Now, if we look at this system here, which is where our limbic system. Now, part of this brain can't tell the difference between something you imagine and something you do. So anxiety is based on something that might happen. So it's not actually responding to
something
a threat.
that might happen.
Yeah, so
that's very interesting.
We call it the what if syndrome in psychology. So it's the what if this happens? What if I fail?
Could we
fear?
also? Yeah.
So this is the basis of fear based, and this is our part of our survival, part of the brain. So being a human, one of the most important things is survival. And so the fear that we feel is really powerful. And so I think mental health is people sometimes reflecting back on things that have happened to them. And it's what happens to somebody that shapes them.
Okay.
And also, you know, if something bad happens to you, it alters the way you think about things, and that alters your biology. So it's looking at environment and, you know, what's happening in that environment. And, you know, your brain is developing from 0 to 24, and anything in that
all
time,
the experiences
it has an effect on us. So depression is usually reflecting back, and anxiety is usually thinking that something bad's going to happen.
Okay. Awesome.
So that your body goes into a fight or flight response.
Oh,
when
fantastic.
That happens.
So what would you have to add to that, Chaz?
Just to add to that, it would be within the limbic system. You have is it the thalamus or hypothalamus?
Yeah, the hypothalamus and the hippocampus.
Yeah, so it's the hypothalamus, and that's the part of the brain which, if you're walking down the street, for example, and you see someone walking towards you, you will assess their body language. So if they're walking quite aggressively with their posture, the brain will tell you that's a potential threat. Whereas if someone's walking towards you and they're quite relaxed, the brain's like, that is not a threat. You can be relaxed.
Yes.
So that part of the brain will then communicate with. Not sure which part is it that generates
amygdala.
Thank you. Yes,
that's the first part, isn't it? The amygdala.
Oh, sorry, that's the amygdala that does that, isn't it? Yeah, sorry.
So that's the threat goes to amygdala.
Yeah, the threat assessment. So yes, thank you for correcting me.
Okay.
So yeah, the amygdala is the threat assessment part of the brain, and then so as Karen was saying, when you're developing and growing, if you suffer through these traumatic experiences, they become encoded and they become part of you. And there's a thing called subconscious association. So, for example, if on a day where you were violently attacked, there was a certain smell. Every time you smell that throughout your life, you'll have that same reaction. So if you were attacked and your reaction was to panic and you felt like a flood of all the cocktail, the norepinephrine and all that good stuff,
I see.
That'll happen again.
Yes.
So what ends up happening is you have this ongoing situation where no matter how old you get and no matter how far away you are from that situation,
that's right.
Every time you have that smell, you'll have that same panic reaction. And that's a big part of how anxiety works. Obviously, there's a whole array of anxieties. There's 100 of them at least, but that's one of them. Okay, that is one trigger.
Well, if we've been able to define this as part of our experiences and possibly the bane of it being fear and anxiety and what have you, what would you consider the important factors in terms of health, mental health?
When the body goes into a fight or flight response, and it's very easy for that to happen. So literally just what if, it doesn't have to be anything that's really bad, and people can get into habits. And what happens in the body is that it will go into a fight or flight, so your heart rate will go up, your cortisol levels increase. And that is great if there's an immediate threat. That is highly appropriate.
So that
if you saw a big bear, you would literally go into that fight or flight. Your subconscious would take over. So it's more powerful than our logical part of the brain. So then, so we get out of a situation very quickly and then we go back to normal. What happens in anxiety and depression is that system is activated constantly. Heart rate goes up, your hands sweaty, stomach churning over, cortisol levels are really that has an effect. So that's quite toxic to the brain, and it actually suppresses the immune system. Also, anyone that's anxious doesn't sleep properly because this is a survival. So imagine if we were living outdoors amongst wild animals and tribes. Our evolution, it was so important that we were kept safe to allow the species to continue. And in the animal kingdom, if you haven't got a system that's quick enough, then they become extinct. So this system has really built for our survival. But obviously it's a bit tricky when you just want to go about your day-to-day stuff. And sleep is our natural healing balm. So health-wise, it really has a detrimental effect.
So it has this positive hint to it. From what I've just listened to you, does it?
Does it have positive?
Yes.
Oh yeah. So a fear response is positive when you're with the need to survive. Yes. When it's not positive is when there's no threat. So what moves us from feeling quite happy to not feeling happy, what we call a negative thought process. Exactly. So each negative thought creates anxiety. And it can go backwards over stuff that's already happened.
I see.
Or it can perceive something that's going to happen. What if this? What if I fail? Creates the fear response. And we can be in this loop of going back over stuff, things that have bothered us from the past, then we can't sleep.
Okay.
And then it's the sleep pattern then that really is detrimental to our health, because we need the sleep in order to repair, to heal. And this is where it becomes really tricky for people.
Do you have
Looking at
anything to
loop.
add to this, the import of mental health?
I think Karen really hit a note when she said the illogical responses. 'Cause I think one thing all psychologists can agree on is that humans as a species are quite illogical creatures. In situations where someone has quite a destructive pattern of behavior, so for example the use of narcotics, that can create a kind of a death spiral, as it were. As we were saying earlier, when someone has a situation where, for example, if they have suffered a traumatic experience or if they have quite a severe mental health issue such as schizophrenia, which actually has quite it's only a 1.7% prevalence, but that's damn high. And it is a horrendous thing to live with. So if you have a situation like you're living with schizophrenia or you have PTSD or something along those lines.
I was actually looking at the import. Okay, fine, we have the positive end and negative end.
Yes.
Okay, but I think you're more or less into the negative aspect of things, right?
Yeah, so let's look at the positive. The positive would say that the mental health, good mental health, or mental health that's functioning as it should, is the difference between waking up at 8 o'clock in the morning
knowing
thinking
how to interact with people.
It's
socializing.
It's that ability to wake up at 8 a.m. and think I'm going to get something done.
Normally.
Yeah.
As a human being.
Basically, to put it to a nutshell.
Yes.
Yeah, if your brain is focused on survival, then it's not really focusing on your happiness and your well-being, and just to feel calm and safe. And a lot of clients that I've worked with, a lot of their issues stem from trauma. It's usually underneath addiction, and trauma can mean different things to different people.
True.
You know, whether it's bullying, they weren't treated properly as children, they were abandoned, they didn't have enough care and enough love, and so they feel unsafe. Part of the brain develops differently if they have 3 or more traumas during sort of 0 to 24. So the amygdala can develop differently, so they can go into adulthood with more anxiety, because it's that system that's on red alert. It's like a red alert system. So they never feel calm, they never feel relaxed, they're always sort of thinking that something's going to happen.
When I was working at the YMCA, I found that quite a lot. Because a lot of the people who end up in the YMCA in this country, I don't want to speak in generalizations, broad strokes, but just to say when I was working there, I found a lot of people who had come through outdoors had traumatic experiences. And again, like you said, it's a whole arrangement. It's not just 1 or 2 things. And those people often had records. They often had issues with narcotics. And those 3 things kind of fed into each other and created this ongoing loop. The trauma is actually probably one of the leading causes of homelessness in this country.
Okay, then
definitely.
Beautiful, because I noticed both of you are actually really looking into the area of concern, and that is extremely important. And that will lead to the next question. What is mental illness?
That's the question.
I think in my experience working with people, it boils down to a base. So it all comes down to how somebody feels about themselves.
That's right.
Yeah,
I think that was the sort of, time and time again, these people don't feel good about themselves. They feel, they might be reflecting on something that they did themselves, or they might be reflecting on how they were treated, and they feel bad. They feel, not good enough, not loved enough, not worthy. And I think it all generally boils down to that, especially with people, that are using drugs, they're drinking. If you deal with the trauma underneath, then you can help them build confidence and self-esteem.
I'd agree with
I think it's a lot to do with how they feel about themselves.
I'd agree with is how you see yourself, because, for example, I train mixed martial arts, and my coach has a brother who has, I believe it's Down syndrome. I could be wrong, but it looks like, I'm not a doctor, I'm not his doctor, sorry. But I believe it's Down syndrome. And he trains in that mixed martial arts, and that's quite I wouldn't say it's an aggressive environment. He's created quite a good environment for like families, but it's martial arts, it's fighting at the end of the day, when you boil it down. And my coach has done such an amazing job of including his brother in that environment that he's a very happy person. He's a very he feels as if he belongs with that environment, and obviously everyone at the club has gone out of their way to do that as well. So, and the point I'm trying to make is that this individual who has Down syndrome, which many people view in, I suppose, a negative light, he's very happy with his life, from what I understand. So when you take people who are severely autistic, for example, and they live their life in a way that they are happy with it, they are experiencing it in a way that they are happy with, can you make the argument that the mental illness or the illness or the situation that they're dealing with is negative? Because if they are happy in their environment, I mean, because I obviously don't have those kinds of conditions, but I've grown up with quite bad anxiety and depressive issues. So I would say I'm not having a good time of it, but obviously these guys are. So it is very much subjective to the individual.
So if I could ask then, what are the symptoms
think
of mental illness?
Mental illness. I think there's biological, there's physical symptoms for people that feel that their heart's racing, their hands are sweat, their stomach churning. Sometimes they feel that they've got IBS. You know, there's other symptoms that they have. So there's physical symptoms, but also there's a feeling of
what about the feeling of
lack of
sad
motivation
or down?
Lack of motivation, not sleeping. Just stop. They stop doing things that they enjoy. And so their world becomes very small, and
what
so they
about
stay
mood
in.
swings and all that?
Well, I mean,
does that also
the conditions you're offering, for example, with the sadness and so on. So in mental health, there's a thing called comorbidity factors. A comorbidity factor is a symptom of a mental illness which is prevalent in several different kinds of mental illnesses. So, for example, as Karen was saying, with depression can pop up in PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and PTSD can come from surviving a car crash, going to war and coming back, being a victim of sexual assault. And so PTSD can sort of be forced upon you, but depression is the side of that, and so is anxiety. But then you have schizophrenia, which has its own issues with depression and anxiety. So when you are talking about symptoms such as feeling sad or mood swings or things like that, you can't attribute that to a single mental health issue. So, for example, feeling down could be a sign of depression. It could also be schizophrenia. It could be PTSD. It could be a lot of different things. Emotional disaffective disorders, which is a gigantic field in its own right, a lot of the conditions in there have issues with some form of anxiety and some form of depression.
That's right.
So, I mean,
I think it's a human thing as well.
It is very,
There's no one on the planet that hasn't felt lonely or upset
or at some point,
you know, or affected by something. And we get as humans, you know, we get affected by things. You know, breakups, our parents breaking up, and what they found now with the research. So one of the techniques I do is called havening, and what they found is that trauma is encoded differently. So that's why it's really tricky for people to try and think their way out or think their way through something, because it's an emotion, and the negative emotion hangs around. And sometimes they can't even...
What about the feeling of annihilation? You know, I mean, you just feel you don't want to be part of what is going on in society.
Part of the fear response is actually moving away from a target. So it's a safety aspect. So we move away from
that
stuff.
Also be considered as symptoms?
And so people stay in, they don't want to venture out. You know, because there's that fear there. They feel safer at home. And
you're sort of like in your nest.
Exactly. So it's like it's the fear response.
Anger part of the symptom?
Anger is usually so it's interesting. Anger is really fear. So it's masked fear. So it's like a defense mechanism. And what you find in there's layers. So there's anger, there's fear, and then generally at the bottom, sadness. And there's all these other things in between. And people don't even realize they're holding on to this emotion. So it's about
suicidal as well.
Thinking that they can't see. So what happens in the body is that when you're anxious, you have tunnel vision. And so when people say, I can't see myself doing that, or I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, it's because you have a physical narrowing of attention when we have fear. So part of what I do is help people work through those emotions, because it's all to do with emotions, because they're more powerful.
Fantastic.
I mean, in terms of symptoms as well, I would always say that people should never try and self-diagnose, because that is a very fast way to create neuroses. So you'll sit there and you're like on WebMD, which is famous, and you're like, I'm going to read this, and then I think I have that.
I get that quite a lot,
and it's like, I've diagnosed myself with like, you know, some form of really obscure bipolar disorder. No, you're just going through a bad period right now. You just need someone to help you through it. It's not that at all. You know, I mean,
Okay.
Don't self-diagnose by any measure.
And also there are labels that aren't actually proven, some of these labels. And I know for sure that if you look under MRI scans of different brains, so someone with anxiety, their brain would look different to someone who's depressed. But there's an absolute match with ADHD and post-traumatic stress disorder, which is really interesting.
Yeah,
So what is the primary cause of depression then?
Oh, wow. Okay. So in my experience, there are 3 that I'm aware of, and I'm going to say I'm aware of because the psychological sciences are moving all the time. It's one of the fastest moving medical sciences in the world in terms of new discoveries every week, because there's so much we don't know about the brain, so it's constantly moving. But to answer your question, the 3 that I'm aware of at this time, you've got, so as I was saying earlier with like the PTSD situation, you can kind of have the depression as a side effect of that, so it's forced upon you. There's the sort of biochemical aspect of it, the biochemistry of the brain. So, for example, if your serotonin levels drop too low, the response from that is you start losing mood. You start dropping off in mood, and so your dopamine levels go down. Everything just kind of goes into free fall. This is why you get.
Could what you're going through be a trigger moment?
Yeah, I think we talk about serotonin levels, but when your brain is focused on fear, the fear response, it's actually not focusing on serotonin levels, so it's not focusing on happiness. For me, I think it's environment. I think your environment plays a huge part, much more than a biological aspect. And I think this is where people there's a misconception about anxiety and depression. So your environment, affects how you think about yourself, how you feel about situations. And I think it's, when I help people change the way they think, and then they can change the way they feel.
I was diagnosed of bipolar disorder, and since then there have been this stigma around me. Everyone thinks I'm crazy, and it's not helping matters at all. What is the way forward for me?
Schizophrenia cannot be cured, but it can be treated. You can make it manageable. So there are medications which will balance out the chemicals and they will suppress the voices you might hear and that kind of thing. Something like depression, depending on the source, can be cured or treated.
Sometimes failing helps us to do it better next time. So is it a failing or is it learning?
Yes.
So it's about how you view it, and sometimes we learn from our biggest failings.
Yes.
And if you look at companies, how many people have gone bankrupt or gone bust and then rebuilt their business?
Yeah.
We're all going to fail at something. But then you think, right, if I failed, what wasn't I doing? What could I be doing?
Mama Helen, you get to take you higher, get to build your home. Smile again, keep a day with Mama Helen and you.
Mama Helen and you, showing on the African Broadcasting Network.